Okay, so I am very excited to be here today as we all gather to listen, learn, and be inspired by the incredible work happening in our various communities. My name is Emanuela. You can call me Ella, and I'll be your moderator for this morning's session. Later today, we'll be joined by Amazing and Yasmin, who will also be the moderators for the afternoon. So the program ahead, if you have a brochure, is full of exciting things. So we have speakers, we have poster presentations, we have oral presentations, and we have breakout sessions that are going to be happening. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Dr. Mokoni to introduce our opener for this morning. Can we give a round of applause?
Okay, my role this morning is very simple. Is to welcome you all and to thank Professor Lang, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, for agreeing to formally open the 9th annual PANAPA conference. Dean Lang, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, good morning again, everyone. Good to see you all. Good morning. Good morning. All right. So I want to start by thanking Patrick Sapong for the invitation to welcome you to this convening of the Pan-African Professional Alliance, or as you all know better than me, Pan-APA, which is an organization dedicated to fostering academic, professional, and cultural connections among African and African-descendant graduate and professional students. I love the mission of this organization for a reason that I'll come back to momentarily. But let me say that the success of academic units, the academic enterprise at a research university like Penn State, depends not only on the research and teaching of faculty, but also the activities of graduate students, right? And the academic work that they do within their academic units, obviously, but also outside of their academic units in organizations exactly like Pan-APA. And so I really appreciate the goal of this organization, the work that this group does, to provide students with opportunities to interact with their peers from other disciplines, other colleges, and indeed perhaps from other universities, offering a way to step into interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary spaces. This is consistent with a lot of the work that the university writ large is endeavoring to do. I'm impressed that this is I'm told, the 9th annual conference of this group. I want to congratulate you, the organization, for existing, I'm told, for 10 years. The organization has been in existence for 10 years. That's fantastic. Let me also acknowledge at least a few of the co-sponsors here. I know that there's a longer list, but the Africana Research Center and African Studies, the African Studies program. And I'll take an opportunity to say that one of the many reasons, Patrick, where are you? Patrick, where's Patrick? Okay, all right. So no disrespect to Patrick, but one of the reasons why I said yes to opening the event is because Professor Mokoni, the director of the African Studies program, asked me. I've really appreciated and valued his leadership, his extremely hard work ethic, and his collegiality as a colleague and as a leader in the College of the Liberal Arts. And so I think he'll agree that usually when he asks me to do something, I generally try to find the opportunity to say yes, and this is no exception. But I'm honored that Patrick sent me the invitation. I understand that for this conference you also have undergraduate students who are going to be presenting, and certainly the development of undergraduate research is a cornerstone of the College of the Liberal Arts strategic plan, and is consistent with the university's desire to contribute to the development of undergraduate academic excellence. So in the college, our priorities as it relates to undergraduate students is finding ways to provide them with opportunities for study abroad, for high-impact internships, and research experiences with faculty, right? Taking these skills that they're learning in the classroom and carrying those into, if you will, extracurricular or co-curricular spaces. So I'm very, very encouraged by the fact that this is an aspect of this event's program. And so I'll end by saying because you all are not here for me, and I want to get out of the way of your festivities and the work that you're poised to do this morning and into this afternoon, that the theme, One Continent, Igniting the Power of African Potential, I'm very impressed and pleased about how that speaks to the importance of African unity, opportunity, and transformation. And as part of that transformation, as many of you, I believe, may be aware, the College of the Liberal Arts is, as we speak, engaged in a project that I pray will be successful, a project of reuniting the African Studies program in the Department of African American Studies. And that's toward the goal of elevating, consolidating, and strengthening how we do work around African and African-descended peoples around the globe. This reflects what many universities are doing, but that's not the reason to do it by itself. But if we think about, for example, what it is to be black in the United States, that it looks very different in 2026 than it did in 1966, if we think about how the population was configured. So you all know better than me that if we think about black people in the United States, they are as likely to have a parent, and in some cases parents, who might be from Nigeria or from Ghana, as parents and grandparents who came from Mississippi or Alabama, right? So if we think about the migratory streams and how that's changed the complexion in terms of ethnicity, nationality, and identity in the United States, this is also part of that work of better understanding how do we learn about and know the histories, the identities, the cultures, the interests of people of African descent and African people, right, in the United States. So that's a global question, but that's a global question that lands in the United States itself. So I'm really excited about that project, and I look forward to the salutary, very positive impacts that that's going to have for those units, for the faculty, for the students, for you all, and I trust for this organization. And with that, I want to wish you all a productive conference. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to slink back to the back there because I'm going to have to exit here fairly soon. I try not to get up this early on Saturday, but Coney asked me, and so I try and say yes. Thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you all. Have a fantastic conference. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Makoni and Dr. Lang. Next, we'll move into our oral presentations. So I hope our oral presenters are ready. The time allotted for each presenter is 10 minutes. Then after that, we'll have a Q&A session that is 5 minutes. So it's going to be very quick. So before we begin, I would like to kind of give a few housekeeping rules. So for our audience, I would like to ask that we fully be present and also support our speakers as they have put in a lot of effort into their work. And also, because we want to ensure that we hear from everybody, we ask that our speakers keep to time so that we can end our conference in a timely manner. For smooth transitions, we ask that our oral presenters move in through this end and exit this way, so then we can have smooth flow on the stage. And if you have any general questions about where to find things, you can go out to the registration area and ask them any questions you have. So without further ado, we'll get started. So our first presenter is De Amusa. De Amusa is a PhD student in the College of Education, specifically the Department of Lifelong Learning and Adult Education. Today, his presentation will be on: is there a right to education? The aporia of out-of-school young adult women in Nigeria. So please, let's welcome Dare with a round of applause.
Okay. Good morning once again. I will be talking on the topic, is there a right to education? The apparel out of school young adult women in Nigeria. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so I will be talking on the topic, is there a right to education? The apparel of out of school young adult women in Nigeria. So I hope my voice is better now. Can we all hear me now? All right, good. Okay, so as she has rightly said, my name is Daria Musa, and I am from Nigeria. So that's why I'm putting on my cap and every other thing. Okay, so next slide. You can. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, so I will be starting with a brief background about Nigeria for those of us who don't know where Nigeria is in the map. So that is, Nigeria is a state, is one of the countries in the western part of Africa, and green, white, green is the color of the flag. So we had our independence in 1960, October 1st, and our nickname is Giant of Africa. We have a landmass of 923,769 kilometers per square, and the population, we are just 220 million. So talking about geopolitical zones, there are 6, which cut across southwest, south-south, southeast, north-central, northeast, and northwest. And we have 300 ethnic groups, and we have 500 languages. About religion, we have Islam, Christianity, and traditional one. So why am I giving us all this information? We will know right away. Okay, so for a nation with 220 million people, doesn't it look somehow to have 20 million people that are out of school? That is like 1 out of 10. So that is to say 1 out of 3 young women are out of school. Why do we have that? When there are different policies that we have national policy on education, we have universal basic education, which started after universal primary education. So the UB started in 2004. That is, which makes education compulsory for everybody, regardless of who you are, regardless of your race, regardless of your gender. Then, Nigeria is also part of the country who signed United Nations rights for children to have education. So if there is right, if there's everything, then why are there some people without education? Does it mean we are not giving education? Does it mean we only have the policy without looking at the implication? It is also somehow to know that out of these 20 million people who doesn't have education, there are 60% of them are women. So we have to know why do we have those things. Now, if you have to look at the existing policy which I have mentioned, there are so many policies that made it compulsory, that made education free. So if education is free, if it's compulsory, then why do we have people who don't have it? Now, tracing the causes, we have the structural causes, we have the socio-economic causes, we have the political causes, the religious and the cultural one. But for this, I will only emphasize on the basic literacy and paper certificate. Our education only emphasizes basic literacy and paper certificate alone. So if we are in Nigeria now, despite the fact that the education is free and compulsory, you have the education. But those who are going to employ you are more interested in the certificate you are bringing, not what you have to offer. So that is why the first thing they will ask you is, do you have a certificate at all? Then if you say yes, then they can then ask you every other question. Of course, this is not to say that we don't have every other problems. Like I said, the socio-economic one, which includes the poverty, is part of the thing. The political one, the government will promise, okay, we have a school. Yes, there's a school. But do you have every other thing to make it a school? Even when people come to school, do they have what to study with? Do they have materials to study with? Those are part of the problem we are talking about. We also have the religious and the cultural one. In some religion, they tell you it's not good for women to have education because they believe after your first menstrual cycle, you should go ahead to your husband to go and do any other thing you want to do. Then there's another thing, or there's another belief that education of women ends in the kitchen. So no matter the type of education they give you, you are going to end up in the kitchen, which is somehow, and that is why we have such number. What are the effects of all these things I have mentioned? If we have 60 million, if you have 20 million people out of school and 60% of women, what is the implication of this in what we are talking about? So as a matter of fact, the women are limited when you talk about economic and self-sustained opportunity. You talk about high fertility rate because of this education, which is not common in every places. Then we have poverty, which is also coming out as a result of this, because what do you expect for people who are basically on the street to beg for alms or something before they can live? Then we have high unemployment rate. I think Nigeria should have probably 40% unemployment rate if we have to check the data. And there's also insecurity. Because of lack of education, there's insecurity. Then we also have poor health outcomes, which is also as a result of out of school. So in doing this, or in finding different articles, or in finding data for this, I actually did so many things. I used what we call Prisma flow to gather my thought together. So, and that is what I have tried to do here by checking different databases, which are Eric, EBSCOhost, Scopus, Sage, Taylor, and Francis. Then, from 354 articles, I screened them down to 194 using the duplicate. Some are duplicate records, then I removed them. Then I also use abstracts, to sort them. Then after that, I also sort them according to how I give them priority, according to what I wanted to do. So I use language to sort some. I remove some because they are not empirical. I remove some because they didn't focus on education, because I'm only interested in education. Some of those articles focus on health and every other thing, which is not my own aim. Then, out of the 355, I was able to pick 30. That is significant for what I'm doing. Then I also tried to check other places like Google Scholar, ResearchGate, and hand searching. So at the end of the day, I was able to use 38 articles, or 38 different articles in general. Okay, so what are my findings, or what are the conclusions? Just like I have said, don't forget I have said, mostly education, aside from the courses, or aside from the main courses that made them out of school, I have mentioned that our education only emphasizes on basic certificate alone. And it seems that the type of education we are given is not really what we need as a developing nation. And that is why, even while some people are in school, they still find a way to go out because they think that the education they are given is not what they needed to be functional in the society, which is a major problem. So, part of my finding is that education policy is poorly implemented. Don't forget, I stated that we have the policy. We have it on paper. It's boldly written that education is free and compulsory. But is it well implemented, which is what we should look at. And when I'm talking about implementation, like I said, it's not just enough to say, yes, we have given you free education. It's not just enough to say, yes, we have provided the classroom. What if there's classroom and there's no teacher? What if there's a teacher and there's nobody to put you through? What if you have those things and you don't have a textbook to read? What if you have the textbook and at the end of the day, there's nothing to do about it? Then, another main findings, which is also part of the conclusion, is that formal education in Nigeria focuses on basic literacy and certification. It failed to engage out-of-school groups. Don't forget, my main focus is the out-of-school young women. And by virtue of that, the out-of-school young women, I mean, we all know out-of-school children. This is just like an extension of out-of-school young children to the young adults. Those who are children today, they are the young adults tomorrow. And the young adults in this context start from age 11 to age 24. So some of them feel because the education they are giving them doesn't really tally well with what they want to do. I mean, if I don't want to be a learned person, there should be a form of education which will also give me, puts me out in line. If I don't want to be a doctor, I should have something else that will make me probably something like a vocational trade, which I will have, which will make me leverage up to every other person too. So we don't have such type of education. Despite that we have technical education, but it doesn't really capture the interest of the out of school. And that is why we have such number of people that are out of school. Then another thing is integration of, can we go back there, please? The integration of basic education with vocational training, which is part of my recommendation. We should integrate basic education with vocational training, especially for the out of school. Somebody who has been on the street to make money, if you want such person to come back to school, it's not enough for you to just say, okay, I'm only teaching you how to read. You have to give them a source of empowerment. So if you match empowerment with education, that will also make them to say, okay, yes, I think I can do this. At the end of the day, they are not only learning to know how to read or write, but they are also learning how to be functional in the society. So the last recommendation I said, there's also a need to plan education with the community rather than imposing it on participants. The basic education is only planned based on the existing policy, based on different groups that we are in, just like I have said. Don't forget, we have everything from the UK because we are colonized by the British. So if you are going to plan education that will work in a place or in a country like Nigeria, it should be planned along with the community because the need of the community differs. So if they have different needs, then you should plan according to their need, which makes it more functional to everybody. So if you want to follow the Faure et al. Recommendation that if you want education to follow education, if they want to learn, you want them to learn education to do, to be, to act, and to live, to be functional, then it has to be planned along with the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dare. We have time for just one question for Dare. I think Debo and Ernest have the microphones, so would you like to give it to the first, sorry, I don't know your name. I can give this to you.
Thank you for the full presentation. I'm a Nigerian, so stuff about Nigeria. And one of the things I see as a big challenge in Nigeria is the fact that we don't even have like a good database. Until now, like during your presentation, we said we have like 220 million. I think the census was in 2006, almost 20 years now, right? So since then, we've been saying 200 million people, right? So, and also, even, we don't really have a good central database. So in your research, in your line of research, how do you get this? Do you find it challenging to be able to like, get accurate data? Because we can just quote that 20 million people are out of school, but how do we really validate this? So do you see it challenging in your line of research? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So if we are saying we have 220 million, it is based on the existing population census that we did last. So, and I think it's right to stay with that as 220 million. Then for the number of out of school, if we check the larger database, if you check UNICEF, if you check UNESCO, if you check World Bank, even all the mainstream media that we have in Nigeria, I'm talking about all the Vanguard, all the newspaper outlets, it's the same thing everywhere. They quote the same figure. And they don't just come up with this figure. There are different things they use in bringing out this figure. And in most cases, they look at UNESCO, they look at UNICEF, and every other one.
You know, like the exact thing, how they get this data. Do they just go to the street and count people, or how do they get this data? Do you know? I'm just curious. If you don't know, it's fine.
Sorry, could you take that again?
Like, if you know how exactly they get this data, or do they like go to the street? I know in Nigeria things work differently, like as it is here. You know, it's difficult to have like data about people. So, do you know the exact they use to get this data? It's totally fine.
Yeah, that's fine. So the data are not just coming up out of nowhere. In some of these things, you have to visit the community, because I stay in Lagos, and it's obvious. You can see most of them that are out of school. I mean, it's not just by saying they are, but you also see them. And if you go to North, of course, you know what is going on in the North right now. Aside from the fact that there's insecurity there, which also spring up the number of out of school, they are everywhere. So when you go to schools, you take record of what is going on there. We know the number of people who are supposed to be in the community. We know the number of people who don't have access to school, not because they don't want to go, but they don't have access. So those are the things we add up together to make that number. Is that okay? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Those who have joined us, we are at the oral presentation phase of this conference. We are on our second presenter. That is Gasto Liakurwa. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Gasto is a PhD student in the College of Health and Human Development, specifically the Department of Recreation, Park and Tourism Management. And today he'll be sharing with us about understanding the influence of wildlife-related ecosystem services and the services on the livelihoods of communities adjacent to the national parks in Tanzania. Let's all give a round of applause to Gasto.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not talking about, I'm from Tanzania, and you know that Tanzania is in East Africa. My talk today is not about AI, it's not about machine learning, but it's about communities that live close to protected area. By protected area, I mean national parks, game reserves, and any sort of protection that protect wild animal and wild plants. And I'm talking in that context, in the context of how communities benefit or get lost from the species that exist in there. We call them wild animals or wildlife. We know that so we know that these species, they have really important to us when they are wild animals. They bring a lot of money to our economies. We know that our GDP depends on wildlife tourism to some extent in most of sub-Saharan Africa. Say East Africa, South Africa, or most of Central Africa, we depend on wildlife tourism to earn some income for the economy. That's great, that's a good one, and we appreciate that. And most of this is wildlife driven. However, we also know that these species that are really good for us because a lot of issues as well. So what I showed you from some of the literature is what's happening and what's projected to happen in African context and in the world. So the map to the left showing how protected area are overlapping, how communities are overlapping with protected area. And because the human population is increasing, and also the protection is also intensifying, we have a really overlap between human and wildlife in protected areas. In such scenario, we expect a lot of overlaps. And what does overlaps mean is that we are having more people closer to wildlife. It's good that we can get money from tourism, as we saw, but also there's another side of it where communities living adjacent to these areas are also getting a lot of loss, especially when it comes to species that raid the crops, when it comes to species that go into the animal, in the livestock. It's really a challenge to these communities. So if you look at the other one, is a burden that most of the global burden of human-wildlife conflicts. And when you see the red one, that's Africa, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. You see the overlap, and most of these species are really pressing livelihoods of those communities that live close to them. This bringing the good challenge. So this is two sides. One being good for global economy at the national state, probably, but my interest is looking at these communities at the micro scale, where this overlap happens. Not sure whether they get what they really get. So when I talk about service and disservice, it's trying to look at the trade-off between the benefits that they get as a community at that micro scale, and also the cost that they suffer from wildlife, and see how better we can create a balance between what they get and what actually is happening in terms of costs of these beasts. So who are the beneficiaries of this? This is one thing we have to ask ourselves. The beneficiaries of most of those wildlife tourism, if you look at it in a broader scale, you might think communities are getting a lot, but does that compensate what they are losing? There's a lot of biases in how benefits are occurred. So what you are seeing here, most of outfitters, tourism companies, probably they are owned by elites. They are owned by people from Western countries. And most of the benefit probably goes into these firms. They are owned by the government, central governments, and this money goes to the government. But how this money goes back to this community is really kind of question. But the cost bearers, we know, these are the communities that really get a lot of issues. You can think of elephant going into a 1 acre farm and robbing all that maize that you have. And then you hear in the TVs and in radio that tourism is booming and we've got a lot of money into country. But are you getting that? We're not sure. So that's what I think of. The costs and benefits are really kind of biased. So my question is, do we strike the balance? Do we see communities getting all these things or not? So overlaps are increasing. Benefits are there. How are we benefiting? Do we think that there's a relationship between wildlife-related costs and benefits to livelihoods? And when I say livelihood, I'm talking about everyday living, getting food, going to school, getting good health facilities and all those ones. So my livelihood in that context, and how what's the relationship that exists between the two? Like, does the benefits or costs affecting all these things or not? So I situated this into kind of wider theoretical framework, but ideally it's just to get to know that there's a service and the service provided by good wildlife, but there's also livelihood in the other side at the household level. But also what we are trying to seek is the coexistence where we balance or trade off the costs and benefits of existing with these species. I operationalized this in this context. It's kind of perception study, so I did perceptions, and those perceptions I put them into context of trying to relate those one. So I have to define what wildlife, what benefits are, what costs are, and what livelihood is in terms of questioning in a 7-point Likert scale, and come up with some of those scales, and then do regressions to try to see how those perceptions relate. So this is kind of operationalization of what I did in terms of structured question modeling. And what I found is if there is a prospect of benefits, there is a kind of positive relationship. People will say yes for wildlife if they gain some sort of economic benefit out of it, which is good news. It's good news because they see that. But also, if we are able to console them, there's a kind of also relationship. If we're able to compensate or console them, they are able to exist in these areas with these beasts. And this was a good example, because at some point we think of extermination of things like wolves in the western side because they cause a lot of issues. If we want people to exist with elephants, with lions, we need to compensate them. We need to give them something out of the losses that they got into. But income-related activities also are very important. We have to provide more income-related activities so that to compensate the losses that they got out of the losses as well. The good news is like the relationship that I got shows that people, despite those losses, they really, really like wildlife. They still want to stay with wildlife. They get a lot of losses, but you are looking at the positive relation. They still see positive attitude to exist with them. So there is a need really to come up with the idea compensating what they have, because African values wildlife because they've been with the wildlife for many years. But again, because of increasing overlap, we are seeing a lot of kind of disparities in terms of the benefit that they can get. This is a situation we have in terms of wildlife, just to almost to conclude. The benefit people create long coexistence if they benefit, but also we have to stand up for compensation and for stuff that it really matters for these communities, particularly because of the problems that they be having. I will wind up by saying the takeaway is that we really have lived in the cities. We have to consider three things. One is how do we balance the benefit and cost of communities existing in these areas? The second is how do we promote wildlife tourism to benefit the communities? And the last thing is communities accept to carry burdens if they see the benefit of existing with wildlife. With that one, take care with it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gasto. So now we'll move on to our Q&A session. But before, I would like to remind everyone that this is being live streamed on YouTube. So if you go to our WhatsApp group, you can kind of connect there and also share with friends and family who would like to watch you share or attend the conference. So let's get started. We have, I think, a few mics out there. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and then we'll bring the mic to you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. This is really important research. My question is, we have a faculty in the anthropology department that specializes in like human wildlife transmitted diseases. Would you say that the wildlife economy and like the economy centered around wildlife in Tanzania is also contributing to like an increase in diseases like around that, if that makes sense? Like diseases from wildlife? Like,
okay, thanks for the good question. So one of the things that wildlife causes to people is also transmission of diseases, and diseases both sides. Tanzania is also one of those. Think about rinderpest. There's a time when eruption of rinderpest and those. So when we talk about costs, one cost could be also chances that people get disease from wildlife, which is really accurate. So my point is try to strike the balance. There are some programs in Tanzania as well, one called connect communities, livestock keepers and farmers with protected area managers to try to think together the interaction and people in terms of health perspective. And that's one of the things I say, do we see that, can we strike that balance to see the rate disease infestation from wildlife is also kind of capped up or treated so that ensure the balance and from wildlife, which is two-way anyway. I might be biased, but also the best one is like, I'm thinking as an anthropologist as well, so trying to think, okay, we need to care of the people because people also care for wildlife. When we care for people first, then people care for wildlife second. That's what that's my view. Thanks.
Thank you again for your presentation. It was very interesting. My question is more on the realm of, so the fact that you already thought about the possibility to give basically money for the people that have to live in those places where there is that overlap. Have you considered the factors that are such as the overlap is mostly due to the increase in the human population itself? So in a sense, obviously the animals they don't really have a say in that. So that's one. Secondly, how else, what if you still give the money to some of those people that are within those areas, but that doesn't make up for them living there? You know, there is the money aspect, financial, but also there is the choice of life, right? And then, so how do you think that impacts HDI, like Human Development Index, and the happiness index as well?
Justice Shaw.
I think that's a good question as well. So what it looks like is when you look at human beings and what we're talking about happiness. So I say people are happy to stay with wildlife. But when they are constrained with their food, their education, their whatever, and these animals are taking their crops, they are really kind of more constrained with the wildlife. We know when we give basic needs to them, they kind of motivated to coexist. And we cannot avoid a coexistence because they have existed in there. And the population, as the population increases, we know that interaction becomes intense. So we expect when they get benefit, they create kind of tolerance.
Thank you very much, Gusto. A round of applause to Gusto for his presentation. I know a lot of people or several others have questions. Because we are limited on time, we'll take the questions and then we'll give it to the presenter and then they can give you their response later, especially during the poster presentation where there's a lot of networking. You can ask further questions because we have 5 minutes for Q&A. Next up is our third presenter. He is Abdul Salam Aminat. Abdul Salam is a PhD student in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences, specifically the Department of Geosciences. Hi. Her presentation is titled Beneath Urban Growth, Waste-Driven Pollution and Groundwater Vulnerability in Lagos State, Nigeria. Let's give a round of applause to welcome her. No, do you have this? Can you? So you No, this is independent. You just have to use the screen because it's on an independent computer.
Okay, so maybe I'll use this.
And I'll be on the app 2 times. I'll give you reminders of the time.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, hi everyone. Just permit me while I figure this out. I didn't know how, the computer thing is gonna go this morning. So 1 second.
You can also use this to the slides.
Where is the pointer? Where? There's no pointer.
I think this might be it.
Okay, okay.
And you have to speak into this one for people to hear you close.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Amina Abdul Salam, and I'm a graduate student here at Penn State. And I'll be making a presentation on beneath urban growth. Before I begin, give me 5 seconds to just acknowledge my students who worked on this, Throwing Comfort Akinlewu, as well as Miriam Razak. I was privileged to supervise their work, and so I just wanted to give a shout out to them. We are all Africans here, right? Or we have friends that we might have invited. I can see someone. So I have a brief warm-up activity, and I want you guys to indulge me by participating in this warm-up activity. Has any of us here ever drunk from a borehole or a well? If you have, just raise your hands. Okay, I can see some hands up, that's good. Keep your hands up again if you've ever, drank the water without testing it, without thinking about what is seeping into the groundwater, anything like that. Okay, same as well, there's no judgment here. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, right? We assume that once the water is clean and clear, then everything is perfect, there's nothing wrong. But in places such as Lagos State, which is where our study area is, this assumption is very, very dangerous, and I'll tell us why. Okay. So we kind of scaled our problem into 3 different groups. The first in Lagos that we looked at concerning the problem is with respect to overpopulation. I won't go much into details because I know we have some general understanding about the overpopulation in Lagos and just the general setting. Lagos State, as of 2024 and I think 2025, Lagos State has a residents of like 17 million people, and it is a small area for the number of people that we have in Lagos. Lagos is, it's a coastal city. It borders the Atlantic Ocean, and it has a lot of water bodies, which includes the lagoons. And, from just this brief thing that I've mentioned, we can see that the number of people that we have, it's highly dense in that small area. So that's one of the problems that we noticed. The second is the urbanization. It is one of Africa, or I think is the largest Africa's coastal megacity. And what does urbanization do? While urbanization is good, which is what we're looking at, the other thing to it is it leads to impervious surfaces, right? When you build roads, you construct things on the ground, you kind of block the ground. So when we have rainfall or anything that is supposed to happen naturally, we've kind of blocked the natural processes from happening. So the second problem is the urbanization. The first is overpopulation. The final thing that we noticed was the unlined active landfills. So we looked at 3 major landfills. We looked at Olusegun, and my pronunciation might be terrible, and I'm a Nigerian, so forgive me. We looked at Olusegun, which is the largest in Africa. We looked at Solus, which is the 2nd largest in Lagos State. And finally, we looked at Temu Epe landfill, which I think was maybe constructed way earlier than, more of recent than the first 2. And all the landfills in Lagos, they are unlined or unengineered. with the exception of Temu, that is like partially engineered. So we looked at these 3 different problems to see what is going on. So what we figured out when we started this project was there has been several projects or several researches concerning, groundwater contamination. We know what groundwater is, right? Water beneath the ground. So groundwater contamination as well as, waterborne disease risk. But what we found out is no single study has looked at this, everything, has connected everything and looked at it either in terms of like geospatial analysis or statistical analysis to try to correlate and see what is going on. So we wanted to like bring everything together to see how one thing affects the other rather than look at things separately. So that was what our study aimed to address. Okay, so we have the study area here, which is Lagos State, and we looked at 3 highly populated local government area. We have 20 local government areas in Lagos State. We looked at 3, basically because of their population density, because of their nearness to the coast. We also looked at it. Lagos generally is a flat terrain or almost flat terrain. And then we also looked at it because of these 3 areas are highly urbanized compared to the others. So all these 3 factors contributed to what we found out later in our study. So what actually happens from landfill? Oh, okay. What is going on? Am I supposed to do it here? Or yeah, what's going on? It's supposed to go down. Like to go to the next part. Yeah.
You might want to consider using this.
So this is my personal one.
So is this functional? This is one that's connected.
I think. Okay. Wait.
You got it.
Okay. Is this working or they'll control it over there? No, down. No, down. It's not going down. Okay, so it's not working. Oh, okay.
So just signal to me.
Yeah. Okay, we are just going to have to manage this a bit of, okay. I was going to show this as it progresses, but it's okay, we get the logic. We are thinking of this as a chain. We have an online landfill. What does that mean? It means that we have nothing like cement in the ground that blocks it from, infiltrating into the groundwater. But when we have landfill, we have this waste, right? But this waste, they don't just migrate. They need something to push it. What pushes it? Things like rainfall. When you have rainfall, this serves as the controlling mechanism to push the waste down into our groundwater. Then we have what we notice is, and what we are all aware of, or most of us are aware of, is in Lagos we have shallow aquifers, right? And because of these shallow aquifers, these are highly susceptible to contamination compared to deeper aquifers. And then this shallow aquifer is what most of us make use of. I asked you at the beginning that how many of us have drunk from boreholes or wells. Most of the wells in Lagos are very shallow. They are andog wells. And so we have people drinking from these contaminated andog wells, and which can lead to waterborne diseases such as the cholera that we looked at in this study. So now, how did we study what we looked at? What we did was before we analyzed this, we needed public health data, particularly we looked at cholera, as well as environment. Okay. Okay. Okay, so what we looked at is, to analyze this, we looked at environmental data as well as public health data. And I had a student worked on the geospatial modeling and the other student worked on the statistical modeling in order to understand what is going on and how all these factors we've mentioned, how they kind of affect or lead to, affect our groundwater in Lagos State. So, looking at this, urban expansion, we've talked about it. I'm not going to go deep into this because we have several literatures that shows that Lagos continues to expand in terms of urbanization. Not expand in terms of the land area, basically, but in terms of the urbanization. And what happens, as I mentioned, is if we look at... okay, this is not working, but we're just gonna, go with my imagination. If we look at 2001, in Alimosho specifically, we have the western and the southern part. You can see the green thing. Most of us that do like GIS, we know that that is like vegetation. We have that, but as you progress and you go to 2024, this vegetation reduces, right? Which means that we continue to seal the land surface. And as a result of that, we are losing the permeable, land soils that serve as natural filtration for our contaminants. The next thing we found was, we did buffer analysis. What a buffer means, we try to understand the distances between our groundwater wells as well as our landfill site. And what we observed here again is that we have Alimosho. It has a distance of 2.5 kilometers. Generally, in the US, let's use US as a case study, because of the geology or because of the characteristics of the land, studies have shown that you can have your landfill site approximately 300 meters to 1 kilometer, depending on the geology and the characteristics of that land. But in Lagos, I've mentioned the several problems, right? We have, permeable soils, which allows this contaminant to go into the ground more easily. And then we also have this urbanization, we have nearness to the coast. So all this makes it, very terrible for us to even have these distances of 2.5 to 7.5 kilometers. And what we observe is in Alimosho, in terms of the groundwater vulnerability, Alimosho is completely flat. I want to ask a question. If you have if you have a flat land, this is a paper, and then I pour water on the paper, what do you think happens? I don't have a gift, but if anyone can just tell me sewing. Does anyone know? This is a flat paper, which serves as our flat land, and I pour any form of water. What do you think is going to happen to the water? Huh? Okay, we have is going to flash, we have is...
Depending on the velocity of the paper, it might seep through and go.
Yes. So I already mentioned we have permeable soil. I also mentioned that Lagos is completely flat. If you have a steep terrain, when you have rainfall, what happens is that you have, runoff, right? It can run off to the river, it can run off to the stream, and, as it's running off, it can either collect other contaminants or get filtered along the way. But because it is flat, what happens to our water or to our contaminants? We have this online landfill. It seeps in, right? And that creates the contamination that we are having in our groundwater. So just for us to kind of understand, that's why we had Alimosho being very high vulnerable when we did the buffer or the groundwater vulnerability. And then Ajeromi Felodun, which is our second local government, it had moderate to low vulnerability because of the slightly tilt terrain. And then we had Mushin. Mushin was highly urbanized, highly dense, but it also had more tilt terrain. So all these are things that we can understand and practically see how the characteristics of a land affects our groundwater. And then this was not by chance. We did statistics which further proved that as well. Particularly in the western part of Alimosho, we can see the hotspot. Hotspot just means that it has high vulnerability, and then the cold spot just means that it has lower vulnerability. So what does this mean? Does vulnerability mean that we have cholera risk? No. It doesn't mean that. Vulnerability just means that it is more prone to this groundwater contamination. I have just 2 more slides, so just indulge me, please. So vulnerability just means that we have, it is highly prone to this contamination, while cholera risk means that, you have higher tendency to have this cholera. And so what we noticed is that Alimosho, that had the highest population, highest population size, has the highest tendency to have this cholera risk, which means that population plays a role in cholera. Why? If I have 10 million people here, it means I'm going to have I don't want to say 10 million boreholes, but we're going to have a larger number of boreholes. And if that is contaminated, it means that we have more people, being vulnerable to that contaminated site. And if we have lesser population, we have lesser people. So that's why this just correlates. And then we have landfill distance, which serves like an inverse. The farthest or the closest, helps you with the risk of contamination. So that's what this just shows us. And then what happens if nothing changes by 2050? If we have the current baseline scenario, if nothing changes, Alimosho will continue to have, we notice that it's going to have double the cholera risk it has in 2025. And then Ajeromi Felodo is going to have a higher relative risk to the cholera it has in 2025. So what is the general findings that I have here? What does this mean? This just means that urbanization removes protection, and then we have population amplifying the risk as we've explained, and the landfill proximity drives exposure as we've also explained, which is the same thing that I have in these 5 scenarios as well. And you can further ask me about this in terms of the scenario, because I found out something very interesting in Lagos. So finally, to my last slide, I really like this last slide because of the African proverb, right? This is an African conference, and I was thinking about it last night before sending it. What can I do to connect whatever I'm saying to the conference that we are here at? And then I found this African proverb that literally translates to, this is that the ground beneath Lagos is telling us something. This is just a refinement of my topic, which is beneath urban growth, right? What we are seeing are non-natural disasters. They are easily preventable, right? They are things that humans, they amplify. And so, this is it. I had something that I was thinking about, which says that a lot of people, what I do in Penn State as well, we study surface waters, which is rivers, lakes, streams, more readily than we study the groundwater, because we don't see it and we feel, okay, it's protected, it's sealed, there is nothing. As long as the water I'm taking from my tap is clean, then that is fine. But that is not the case, because of this African proverb that says that when the water is calm, do not think that the crocodile has gone. And what does that mean? This literally translates to clear water might look safe, but the danger is still there beneath the surface. You're not seeing it doesn't mean that it is not there. Most of our contaminants, they are colorless, they are odorless, they are only measurable. And so if you don't measure it, for instance, I studied nitrate at Penn State, and then you can't see that in your water, but when you measure it, you can see that it has very high nitrates in it. And that is very dangerous for pregnant women, for everyone in general. So you can't see doesn't mean that it is not there. So I want us to take this home, at least if we don't take anything home. And once again, acknowledging my students that extensively worked on this. Comfort worked on the geospatial analysis, and then Miriam worked on the statistical analysis. Thank you. Also, I knew that was a lot, so pardon me for that. We had a lot to do, so thank you.
Yeah, let's give another round of applause to Abdul Salam. Unfortunately, we cannot take Q&A because we have to keep up with schedule. However, during the networking session, if you have any questions, please connect with her so she can explain further. Our next presenter is Megdes A. Selassie. Megdes is a PhD fellow in the College of Education, specifically the Department of Educational Policy and Leadership. Her presentation is titled Beyond Datasm, Ubuntu, Ethical Relationality, and Algorithmic Power in African Societies. Let's give a round of applause for Megdes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I would like to give you a small correction. I'm not in the Department of Policy. Rather, I'm in the Department of Learning and Performance Systems. So as you can see, this is my presentation. Okay. So assume you're walking around your neighborhood and you're meeting with your friends and colleagues and you're wandering around and minding your business. Someone approaches you and greets you and say, oh, can you help me? I'm coming from another country. So that person seems like harmless, friendly, and you're just trying to connect with that person. But unfortunately, the person is wearing a glass like that, probably currently the famous glass, which is the Meta glasses in the space. So, like, you're recorded and your data is like in the hands of somebody. At that very moment, you're not connecting with somebody else, rather you are like a data for that person, and then they become like, you become the content, and at the same time they modify you as a data, not as a person. This situation was happening in one of the cities in Africa, probably 2 cities in Africa. So I bring this up for us because there is a notion which is called dataism. And as you can see, dataism is nothing but trying to diminish everything into data. So the belief in dataism is more data, more progress. But the issue is, human life, is it always possible to quantify, to measure, and to predict? Rather, there is always a missing element, because as a human being, we are not always quantifiable. Rather, we have like context, history, and humanity. So in this, how is this possible? Yo. Is this the right one? Okay. Unfortunately, my slide is not like going as it's planned. Anyways, as I told you like earlier in the previous slide, the whole concept of this research is, are we only diminished in numerical forms? Are we only even data? So if we are not, there is some problem, which is like, as you all know, AI is like a buzzword everywhere, especially in Africa. It's not like coming as anything, rather we do have a history of surveillance, extraction of economies, and structural inequalities. So what AI does to us right now is decide visibility, shapes access, define belonging. This is not technical, it's rather political. So if we're like in the era of AI, one of the powerful tools currently we have is algorithm. As you all know, algorithm is something which is powerful and it's not neutral by itself, and as a result, it makes a decision on our behalf. It is a gatekeeper and it is an invisible governor. What does that mean? It means everything that we do gives up feedback, like give data about us, and then based on the data that we feed in the system, we are predicted. But in this instance, what happened? The first thing is ethics gap. What does that mean? That means we ask, was there consent when I give my data? Was data protected? But always there is the issue of power, inequality, and collective harm. What does that mean? If I give my data, the one who has the data has the power over me. So can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in order to understand this problem, I'm just trying to see the common discourse currently that we have. It is the narrative problem, and it is framed always like when we heard about AI, it is either utopia or catastrophe. That means either it is a blessing or it is a curse. But if we look into it, the reality is both assume the same thing. Whether it is a blessing or a curse, there is what we call it a centralized control system, which is, it's not me, it's not you, rather it is a collective decision made by others. When I say others, so those who have the right and the privilege to have access to our data. So the real question is not whether AI is good or bad, it is who gets it to participate and who does not. It's all about participation. Can we? So it's, as I said, it's all about participation because systems are designed, they reflect who is included, who is excluded, and whose knowledge counts. It is an epistemic question, and at the same time, if we don't include or if we are not part of the design process, we might not be like that valuable for the space. So, is it a question of power? Yes, it is a question of power. So how are we going to make it? We need to have like some kind of participation, but as you all know, currently, especially in Africa, we are a consumer, right? We are giving our data for a system, but the participation rate that we have currently is very minimal. So in this research, I'm just trying to address how are we going to be part of the conversation. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, since we're African, right? And then probably you might have heard of the term Ubuntu and Cosmo Ubuntu. Like the term Ubuntu, it is an African philosophy, but in this research, it is a theoretical framework that I'm using for this research. And the Cosmo Ubuntu, it is a philosophical underpinning. It's all about relationality and dignity shared as a human being. It's not an isolated fact, rather, we are human. The definition is a person through other person. So we are not a silo. So now, if we are trying to design AI space in Africa, all right, okay, can we go to the next, please? So, my research area, like my research places in Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Mali, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, it's because of their current highly investment in biometric system, digital welfare, and predictive governance. And the basic questions for this particular research are focused on how is power embedded and how do people respond. Please. So, in my methodology, I use both theoretical and technical. For the theoretical part, I use like institutional analysis, policy review, and the political theory, because this AI system, especially in Africa, has some kind of political implication. Can we go to the next, please? For the technical pipeline, I understood AI as a full system. What does that mean? The whole system, especially from data collection to data annotation, modeling, and output and impact assessment is one of the technical pipeline that I'm examining in this research. Next slide, please. So, when I say data annotation, the fundamental thing, the fundamental questions that we need to raise as the data annotation phase is, because it is the fundamental and the foundational in shaping AI system. So we need to focus who collects the data, who labels it, and under what assumption. Why I'm saying this? Because when we are looking at data, the first thing that comes to the conversation is language. Which language, which culture, and which categories of meaning are embedded in the system. Can we go next, please? Thank you. So, as you know, as I already said, when I say system, it is input, process, output, and impact. So, in the process, The only thing that I would love to see is the algorithm, because in my previous discussion I say algorithm predicts the power to be represented in a certain way. So in the process model, what features are selected, what patterns are learned, and what is optimized is the ultimate thing that I would love to evaluate. And then the evaluation, the output, and the impact is who is included. All right, can we go? So, the finding. It is like, since the problem that we have currently is our data is collected, but as a result we failed because we're not represented. Why? We don't have that system. As a result, we are facing different problems. So, the recommendation that I give is, number one, we need to understand the system. When I say the system, we need to understand the input, the process, the output, and the impact. Next slide, please. Second, we need to own our own data. As you know, every one of us are using different data and data sources, but we don't have our own. Google is not African, right? So we need to have our own data repository. Next slide, please. So there is a term, like there is this platform, it is called AI for Africa. So the AI for Africa is an African platform, so we are supposed to hold our data in that so that we can have the leverage to control our own selves. The final thing is ethics. Ethics it seems like a fancy word, but unfortunately we need to define ethics based on the African perspective. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, ultimately, let's train the machine, but we need to be represented. And then the data repository must be look like this. Last, please. Thank you very much.
Megdes, you can stay here so we can. Thank you very much, Megdes. Now it's to the Q&A session. We have time for one question. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. My question has to do with, you mentioned that one of the important things that we must do as African people is to have a power over the inputs of, what builds an AI or an algorithm. So what do you think can be done about making sure that what is inputted into that algorithm doesn't contain biases or, things that would foster inequalities so that we can support our communities?
Okay, thank you so much. So, as I'm trying to address in one of my slides, the fundamental thing that we need to do in order to be represented properly, we need to have our own data. When I say data, it's not simply a mere collection of facts, but in AI, there is what we call it a term or a process, what we call it, data annotation. It is about collection of data, and then trying to label and feed the system or train the machine based on the collected data. The problem lies there. If I'm not collecting data about my own country, probably, like say for instance, I'm from Ethiopia, from Addis. I can't represent fully, I did not to say I know about Ethiopia, no. Because there are so many language, culture, and representation. So, as you said, there is a bias. Think about it. If there is no any African in the table and everything is like coded and trained and everything, you can imagine, right? So the idea of it is, like I said, when I try to understand how are we going to create our own repository, we need to have a representation. That representation should reflect who we are as an African,
as an Ethiopian, Ghanaian, or Kenyan, and at the same time, there should be some kind of definition. In my presentation, I am even trying to define the word accuracy, because probably accuracy might be defined in a certain term, but accuracy must be defined in terms of the Ubuntu framework as something which is representative. Got you? All right. Okay. Any questions?
Let's give a round of applause to Magdes.
Because I can't stand there.
Okay, our final presenter for this morning's oral presentations is Nkosia Knight. Nkosia is the Director of Research at NIHAST Foundation, Georgetown University. Her presentation is titled Cultural Competency and Immersive Learning as Pathways to Global African Consciousness. I think this is a good segue from this presentation we just had, so that'll be very interesting. Let's give a round of applause to welcome her.
Don't start the timer yet. It is easier to build strong children than to fix broken men. Hi, my name is Nkosi, and I am the author of Play the Game, Hierarchical Simulation, and today I will be presenting to you guys my presentation on cultural competency and immersive learning as pathways to global African consciousness. Okay, next, okay. I situate this project at the intersection of Pan-African thought, diasporic studies, and decolonial education, and I am especially concerned with how African youth come to know Africa and themselves in the aftermath of slavery, colonialism, and racial capitalism. At the center of this project is a simple but urgent question. What does it mean for African youth to encounter Africa as a living, historical, and contemporary world? I approach education as a site of knowledge production and political struggle, because what youth learn about Africa shapes how they imagine their own identities, solidarities, and responsibilities in the world. In that sense, this project is not only about learning Africa, it is about rethinking how African people learn themselves. Many of us in this room grew up with an Africa that was assembled for us through textbooks, mass media, and state narratives. That Africa was often framed as a site of lack, crisis, or a romanticized origin story, but rarely as a complex, self-determining civilization. I call these propagandized distortions, knowledges produced with colonial epistemologies that flatten African stories and histories and erase African agency. For African youth, these distortions matter deeply because representation shapes possibility. It cultivates how young people comprehend their place in a global African world. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And so the theoretical scaffolding of this draws from three primary literatures, first being Pan-African philosophy, which offers a framework for comprehending Africa and its diaspora as a single, though internally diverse, political and cultural project. Second, diasporic studies, which helps us understand displacement, forced migration, cultural genocide, and ongoing movement as the conditions through which global African presence has been produced across multiple geographies and regimes of racialization. The third being decolonial education, which challenges Eurocentric hierarchies of knowledge and insists that schooling can either reproduce colonial power or become a site of epistemic disobedience and liberation. Together, these traditions allow me to read cultural competency training not as a neutral skill set, but as politically charged intervention into how youth know and inhabit the world. Next slide, please. Methodologically, this study is grounded in ethnographic immersion and critical pedagogy. The United Association of Moors is a youth-centered learning collective I founded in 2019 to make this work possible. Our intention is to support members in securing passports and mobility infrastructure with the long-term goal of facilitating travel to African and diasporic communities for immersive learning. By ethnographic immersion, I mean that youth and educators do not relate to Africa from a distance. They enter into sustained relationships with African communities, cultural workers, and institutions. This can take the form of collaborative arts projects, language exchanges, community-driven research, or engagement with historical sites and archives that document both violence and resistance. Critical pedagogy guides how these experiences are framed and reflected upon. It asks youth to name power, question who benefits from particular narratives, and connect personal experience to broader structural analysis. Next slide, please. And so what I desire from building this cultural competency is to reorient youth from consumers to producers and critics of knowledge about Africa that will link their identity formation to analysis of power, history, and global structures. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. And the materials that inform this project include 6 years of participant observation and immersive learning, settings through More Search, and the upcoming Siddiqui Educational Safari Incorporated, where we will be taking young people to San de Pasillo Palenque in Brazil, where youth will have reflective journals, group dialogues, and interviews with both youth participants and adult facilitators. Across these materials, I trace how language, affect, and political imagination shift over time. I'm especially attentive to moments when Africa moves from an external object of study to an internalized, embodied reference point. These shifts matter because they signal a movement from distant identification toward felt diasporic belonging. Next slide, please. And so the first theoretical trajectory I want to name is the movement from abstraction to embodiment. In many colonial and neo-colonial educational contexts, Africa enters youth consciousness through secondhand images of news reports, charity campaigns, or vague ideas of roots. I theorize that immersive engagement can transform that relationship by making African sensory and relational through language, food, art, dialogue, and co-presence. In the Palenque context, I anticipate this will be especially significant because it allows youth to encounter African communities that narrate their own histories of survival, memory, and resistance. This is how cultural competency becomes embodied as a felt diasporic proximity becomes a cornerstone of cultural competency. And so next I wanted to show you guys a slide of the San Basilio de Palenque. If you can click on that YouTube symbol to get it to play for you guys quickly. It's okay. Maybe just pay attention to the images if you can't hear very well. Okay, next slide, please, because it's not, you guys can't hear it, but what it's talking about is a Guinea king who was taken from Guinea, of course, enslaved as a prisoner of war, brought to the Americas, Southern Americas, and he created a Palenque Maroonish community. Next slide. Okay, this can't count towards my time, guys. Okay, and so images like this is showing the story of Maroonish communities. So again, emphasizing that resistance against bondage, and then this concept of prisoners of war. And this is the type of information we want to bring in front of young people. Next slide, please. So you're seeing that there's African people fighting. And so a lot of times this is often taken away from our stories. Next slide, please. So for the second trajectory moves from symbolic nostalgia or passive victimhood to contemporary praxis of prisoners of war. Many programs for African youth stop at heritage, tourism, lineage, tracing, or symbolic returns. While those practices can be meaningful, they can also remain confined to the past. And in this project, I theorize a different outcome, that youth will begin to connect histories of enslavement, maroonage, and resistance to present-day structures of racial capitalism, neo-imperialism, and global struggle. That is why I want to frame African and diasporic peoples not simply as victims, but as prisoners of war who continue to resist. This framing makes visible the continuity between historical crimes against humanity and ongoing wars and crises in places like Congo, Sudan, Palestine, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela. For youth, that connection is imperative because it situates them within a global struggle for sovereignty, dignity, and a world-making praxis. Next slide, please. Another image of showing that African connection in Colombia. Next slide. And so, taken together, this project argues that cultural competency training, when grounded in genuine immersion and critical pedagogy, is both an intellectual project and a political act. It equips youth with interpretive tools to read the afterlives of slavery, colonialism, and imperial capitalism in contemporary life, while also nurturing ethical and effective commitments to global African community. It makes building the infrastructure of travel, exchange, collaboration, and relationship necessary for that transnational solidarity. Ultimately, my hope is that this work contributes to a renewed sense of collective destiny, grounded in truthful knowledge, art, and the everyday practices of global African solidarity. Next slide, please. And so thank you so much for holding space for this work. I would love to connect with you all to talk more about what my project is. So if you want to click on that QR code, it's going to take you to my website, www.nkosi-a.com. Again, I'm the author of Play the Game, Hierarchical Simulation. Next slide. Asante Sana, Medase, Nkosi, Jarajef, Mr. Ganalo. And again, it is easier to build strong children than to fix broken men. Have a good day.
Now we have a 5-minute Q&A session. So I think we have time for actually 2-ish questions. So let's get started. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you.
Yeah, I did. Oh.
Yep. Thank you for an enlightening presentation. I know you mentioned towards the end that your goal is, I can't say as eloquently as you did, but have a better or more, I guess, connected view of Afrocentrism. But furthermore than that, how do you think it will impact the social life of, African Americans? How do you feel, for one, do you think there is a connection between that lack of root to where it is that they're from, and possibly the violence and different
it sounds muffled.
Actions that are being portrayed or done here in the United States? And if so, do you think that having more of a root and understanding would impact that as well?
Maybe you can follow up with her later if you didn't get it.
I'm so sorry. It sounds so muffled because of the microphone. Can anyone, can you just maybe say it loudly in a concise way? No. Do you want to come? Yeah, just yell maybe. Sorry, that microphone is so muffled. Yes, better. Mm-hmm.
Feeling, but also how do you feel, for one, the lack of deep roots to Africa and where it is that people are from, African Americans' lives, and how it is that sometimes there is that
Okay. I'll start there because okay. Okay. Yes. Oh, you want me to repeat it? Okay, so she basically asked me, you guys are testing my memory, about how African Americans feel with their disconnection to Africa, if I don't get you wrong, and then also how it can shift by establishing that identity socioeconomically. I think so. Okay, and so what I would say, my emphasis is on youth and children, and so my quote by Frederick Douglass is, "It is easier to build strong children than to fix broken men." So basically, I'm like, the adults are lost, though. So but I center a lot of my work in education systems, and so I get to work directly with young people. I'm coming from Washington, D.C., and I think even Pennsylvania has a few Afro-centered schools that still exist. And so there was a time in the 60s and 70s, where there was this Pan-African identity that was really boosting in America. People wanted to connect to that African identity, and because of that, they built institutions for that, and it built a stronghold for that sense of identity. Now it has been lost, but for elders who are in their 70s and 80s, they'll tell you back in the day that they had that strong solidarity that created community a lot of times, and I get to be a part of that in Washington, D.C., and so my goal is to build that in this day and age for our generation, but specifically for the children, so they have that space to be centered around Africa, even with that disconnection, even with the laws that are being passed, that they don't have the ability to have that history. Unfortunately, it's been taken out of museums, out of schools, and so the hope is to keep that information right in front of them, and so they can have not only the agency, but they can see the similarities that's going on a global axis, and then that creates a shift from being participants of racial capitalism and going towards something that's more communal. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's...
Thank you, guys.
Can we give a round of applause for Ingosia? We have a 5-minute break because we're a bit behind schedule. However, you can stay in the vicinity because we are going to get started soon at 11:10. So, for example, for those who are not able to ask questions because we were limited on time, feel free to go to the presenters, ask them questions, connect with friends, and then we'll start at 11:10 with our keynote speaker, Dr. Buhari.